everyone. My name is Colin Mitchell, as Robert said, and I'm a sustainable agriculture specialist at the National Center for Appropriate Technology. Everyone calls us NCAT for short because that's easier. Thanks for joining us today. And today I'm going to be highlighting some of the work we've been doing in the Subtropical Soil Health Initiative in collaboration with the University of Texas at Rio Grande Valley. The work we have done in the Subtropical Soil Health Initiative has largely been focused on improving soil health in row crops and dryland farming and vegetable production through cover crops, and focusing on how we can reduce or eliminate tillage when incorporating cover crops. This presentation is largely going to focus on dryland farming systems. That's where the bulk of our work has been, even though we have done work in vegetable production. During this initiative, we have seen lots of successes, as Robert says, in how figuring out how to improve soil health by incorporating cover crops in dryland production. But we've also seen lots of challenges, and I look forward to discussing both of those in the next 15 minutes. Before we start, I wanted to share a little more info about NCAT. I work out of our Southwest office in San Antonio, and I do miss coming down to the Valley and look forward to it again once COVID calms down. Really miss all our partners there and seeing everybody. NCAT is a nationwide nonprofit organization that was established in 1976 that has 5 regional offices across the country. We are in Arkansas, Mississippi, California, New Hampshire, and of course, Texas, with our headquarters in Montana. Also, we have some staff in other states such as Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Colorado, and we work on issues pertaining to sustainable agriculture, sustainable energy, and sustainable communities. So ATRA is our flagship sustainable agriculture program, and through this program, which is a cooperative agreement with USDA Rural Development, so thanks to them as always for their support. And through ATRA, we're able to offer a wide range of services to sustainable ag producers, including publications, toll-free helplines, and webinars. You can check it out for yourself after the webinar on our ATRA website, www.atra.incat.org. Like I said, we have tons of publications, videos, podcasts, so you can listen while you're on your tractor, and including lots of publications in Spanish. And I also did want to share that we do have a Spanish language newsletter, Cosecha Mensual, available. To just subscribe to that, head to www.incat.org/subscribe. And if you have technical questions, we provide free technical assistance. Don't ever hesitate to call us at 1-800-346-9140 or askanag@incat.org. So now to the main topic, cover crops. So in our project, we have trialed just about every cover crop species that is typically recommended for Texas, including some that are innovative and new. The Rio Grande Valley is unique in Texas, and Texas is a large state. So not everything that works, cover crop wise in say the Panhandle or Central Texas will work the same as it would in the Valley. The bioregions are just too diverse and the climate is way different. So we were able to determine some clear winners based on a couple of different factors. Some important ones were their availability to purchase and availability to purchase for large acreage and their cost effectiveness for large acreage. Margins on dryland farming are very small, so a really expensive cover crop just isn't going to work. To be a winner, these cover crops also had to be able to produce a large amount of biomass. Another consideration to be a winner is a high germination rates to produce a good dense stand, and both of these factors work together to allow for the cover crops to provide significant weed suppression in hopes that we can break these weed cycles and ideally reduce or eliminate herbicide use. And lastly, to be a winner in South Texas dryland farming systems, the cover crop can't take a lot of water from the soil, which we're going to discuss quite a bit later. And most of these cover crops that I'll be discussing, if we planted them, in September, they've been able to provide even a cover over the winter unless the valley gets an intense rare freeze. And most of these are going to be warm season annuals that I'll be discussing. Okay, so the first winner is iron and clay cowpea. And iron and clay cowpea is a warm season annual cover crop. It is also a legume that fixates nitrogen into the soil through nodules when conditions are right. And Stephanie will be walking you through this process and how to make this successful and kind of check yourself to be sure you're getting that nitrogen in your soil after my presentation. That picture in the top right was actually the nodules that fixate the nitrogen. And as you can see from this other picture on the bottom, that iron and clay cowpea produces quite a bit of biomass. It can actually vine out and grow really like nice long 5 foot vines. Iron and clay cowpeas are mature in about 45 to 50 days and will start to flower around then. They'll get this really pretty light purple flower. And they're also really drought tolerant. We've been really, really happy with how they performed in the summertime during droughty conditions, and they bounce back once you get a little nice recharge rain. We recommended these over some other ones like Red Ripper cowpea. We just saw them perform better when we compared the two. So next is Sunn Hemp on our winners list. And again, Sunn Hemp is a warm season annual cover crop that also has the ability to fix nitrogen in the soil. It's got a nice, a little bit longer of a taproot and can help mitigate parasitic nematodes, which is great. And this cover will start to mature and start to flower around 45 to 60 days. And it produces that really pretty yellow flower you see there, which we've seen bees and other pollinators just swarm to. Um, and that flowering date and that growth rate is going to be real dependent. Because the temperatures are warm in South Texas in the fall, we have been able to plant this, say, in mid-October, to get it to germinate and produce a stand, but it went to flower very quickly because it didn't have the sunlight hours it needed. It didn't get very tall, and it didn't produce that biomass we wanted. So plant it more towards the September time if you want to have a cover up to right before, say, like a sorghum planting in February or January. It does produce an immense amount of biomass, about 6 or 7 feet tall. I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'4". You can't see me, but like we'll go in there. It'll be over my head. And it's also really fibrous. It's something when you go in, you can actually bend it and snap the actual stem, and it'll break down more slowly than the cowpea because of that. And again, really great, drought tolerant. That one's a clear winner for us. So this third one is going to be sorghum Sudan grass, and again, warm season annual. But this cover crop is not a nitrogen fixing cover. It is a carbon rich hybrid between sorghum and Sudan grass. And if your goal is solely to reduce nitrogen fertilizers, this would not be the crop for you to go for. However, if you are using nitrogen fertilizers, they can recycle some of that leftover nitrogen that may be in the soil by creating tons of biomass by soaking up that leftover nitrogen. And again, this one gets up to about 6 feet tall, as you can see from our colleague Andy Cruz, who's farm manager at Hilltop Gardens, and he's been, shout out to Andy. He's been an enormous asset during this project. And again, sorghum Sudan grass will start to reach maturity in about 45 days. Andy was able to mow this one down and have it kind of retune back out, be able to get some nice growth out of it. So lastly is daikon radish, and it was a winner sort of. It does perform very well in cool season and produces a large tuber that creates lots of biomass in the soil that is wonderful for breaking up clay hard pans. I personally use this in other situations where I was trying to improve heavy clay soils in Central Texas, and it worked great. However, there is a problem with this cover. It takes up significantly much more soil moisture than the three crops I just mentioned. We live in a droughty area. The valley sometimes gets 14, 15 inches of rain a year. Sometimes it's all at once. And we're going to discuss this soil moisture kind of issue here in a minute. So, this one's great if you irrigate, but, it's not going to be the best for you dryland farmers. And we had a few other covers that did okay, like black oats and cereal rye. But, these went to seed really fast. It caused problems of regrowth and reseeding in the field, or they regrew once we terminated them, interfering with our farmers' production. So they did not make the list. Another thing we researched was the effect of different seeding rates on weed suppression. And we tried many of our top cover crops that have the recommended seeding rate, exactly the recommended seeding rate, and 1.5 times the recommended planting using our no-till drill pictured here. The 1.5 times seeding rates technically did suppress slightly more weeds, but also used much more soil water. And the covers didn't grow to their potential because of competition between the plants. They were too crowded. Half this seeding rate did save water, but also did not suppress enough weeds. So there's a balance there you kind of have to reach in. So, we can confidently say that 1 times, that exact seeding rate that companies are recommending, follow that because it's a great balance between weed suppression and water saving. Oops, sorry about that, y'all. Let's skipping ahead. So that magic question of do cover crops steal water? And depending on the year, yes, they definitely can. And depending on where you are in your journey of using cover crops, and this is a an issue for dryland farmers. It's a reality. This graph shows the root zone soil moisture from planting our cover crops in kind of late September there, and into sorghum planting season. In late April, we plant our sorghum, or Andy does in February, and as you can see, the control, which is just a field that's or section that's fallowed, is there in black, and it uses there's more soil moisture during that cover crop period in September, October, November. We terminate in December. Soil moisture goes back up. We also got some winter rains there. Everything kind of joins back together. And again, you can see as it goes down, the black, the control, has more soil moisture. And then they all end up fairly similar together, except for that yellow one, which is treatment 4. And that's our daikon radish. So it performed the worst. And that's why we're telling y'all dryland farming system, we're not going to recommend it for you guys and gals. But you can see at the end there, cover crops did perform slightly better of our trial period of those cover crops into the sorghum season. Slightly more soil moisture available. So this is just to reiterate that point of cover crops taking water, and we're going to talk more in a second about recharge periods. But that black line again is the control. CP is cowpea. A mix is a sorghum, Sudan grass, cowpea mix. That blue one, SH, is Sunn Hemp, and then SG is sorghum, Sudan grass. So you can see across the board, once we get in December at termination, the cover crops are taking more water, and there's less soil moisture available. So this last one is pretty graph heavy. And these charts expand on this notion that in the first few years, especially in dry years, cover crops can take water and can negatively affect cash crop germination. The top row is moisture after the cover crop was planted and terminated. The middle one is the moisture in the soil at seeding, at sorghum seeding. And then the bottom one is going to be sorghum germination measured by seedlings per meter. And cover crops created less soil moisture versus, fallow or control. And then you have our cover crop in every scenario except in year 2, because we faced some pretty significant droughts in year 1 and year 3. And you can see in year 2, the cover crop plots versus the fallow had less soil moisture right after the cover crop, but they actually, at the time of sorghum seeding, had more soil moisture available. And then at the bottom, you can see it had slightly higher germination rate. And we figured out that there needs to be a good gap, and we figured out that kind of terminating our cover crop in December for February sorghum planting gave us enough time for that cover crop to break down, roots to break down, and to build up some of that organic matter, to have a recharge period to let soil moisture get in the back in there. And by the top row, you can also tell it was a wetter period. There was much more soil moisture in year 2 compared to the other years. All this tells us is that cover crops can use up water and negatively affect germination in dry years, but you can also see gaps in in soil moisture between control and our trials shrinking, telling us that we are slowly starting to see the benefits of increased organic matter and water holding capacity that cover crops can provide. I think this shows, and what we're seeing is that it takes longer time than it's not going to be a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year thing to get that improvement. It's going to take multiple years. I think this really shows how important it is for farmers to seek financial assistance if we're going to be adopting cover crops through great organizations such as NRCS when adopting cover crops to offset possible risks. Lastly, we have experimented with different ways to economically terminate cover crops in organic dryland, including flail mowing, tilling, disking, strip tilling, and the roller crimper. Right now, we can't wholeheartedly recommend the roller crimper because the only crop it has been successful for has been Sunn Hemp. And even then, it really did not provide a sufficient enough kill to our farmer partners. All those other softer cover crops like cowpea, it just kind of rolls over and it just kind of bounces back up. And we also don't get freezes like folks in Wisconsin where you see the roller crimper really doing well. So their recommendations for the roller crimper don't work for us in South Texas. And we did do some strip tilling and it does show some promise, but one of our farmer partners had a new type of weed he didn't have on his farm before pop up and dominate the strip till lines during a big rain. The flail mower also did not provide adequate kill and actually clogged the mower when we tried it on Sunn Hemp because it's very fibrous, and most other covers regrew. Right now, we've still been disking as our most effective organic no-till, um, not no-till, most effective kind of kill method for dryland farming. Vegetable growers, you have a lot of other options that dryland does not have, like you could bury your cover crops in compost. But we look forward to continuing this work on trying to determine termination methods that are appropriate for dryland farmers in the Rio Grande Valley. And I do want to take a moment to thank NRCS for funding the Subtropical Soil Health Initiative through a conservation innovation grant. We're really appreciative of all of y'all's support we've received over the past 3 or 4 years, and also incredibly appreciative of the continued support NRCS is showing the Subtropical Soil Health Initiative by providing funding for the project through the next several years through a conservation innovation trials grant. And I'm really excited to get to continue to come back down to the Rio Grande Valley and work with Dr. Vaselis and his team at UTRGV. So we look forward to further work with NRCS, UTRGV, and the amazing farmers of the Rio Grande Valley. Thanks y'all for having me and attending the conference.
Thank you, Colin. I'm going to ask Stephanie to talk here in a minute before we go to questions. As I mentioned earlier, Stephanie is a research scientist down there at UTRGV, been working with us throughout the whole length of this project. And she's really been focusing on the last year or so, really on how the nitrogen fixation efforts have been going on within the project. So Stephanie, please take it away.
Yeah. So thanks to Colin. He gave us a really great overview of all sorts of different cover crops that we've been trying as part of this project. I'm going to do more of a deep dive into a specific group, legumes, and they're really appealing to a lot of folks that are interested in cover cropping because in addition to all of the other potential benefits of cover cropping, the legumes also offer the opportunity for increased soil nitrogen that can really benefit the following crop. So just a little overview on cover crops. This is anytime you're growing a crop for the soil benefits rather than for the crop that you can harvest off of. And some of those soil benefits include increased soil organic matter, reduced erosion by wind and water, improved water infiltration. So when we do get those kind of rare rains here in the Rio Grande Valley, we can hold on to that moisture better in the soils. Nutrient retention and nutrient cycling, weed suppression, and the nitrogen fixation, which we're going to talk more about now. So legumes are a plant family that works with a bacteria called rhizobia to convert nitrogen in the air into a form that plants can use. They're a really diverse family. They include lots of different species, including on the left side, we have some of our cool season temperate legumes. So they're good in the cooler winters here in the valley. And that includes vetch, chickpea, clover, burr-medic, forage pea, lentils. And then on the right, we have the warm season. They're from more subtropical and tropical areas. And they include mung bean, pigeon pea, velvet bean, cowpea, soybean, Sunn Hemp. So these are the guys that can make it through the really hot and dry summers that we have here. So the bacterial partners of these plants live inside nodules, which are small growths on the plant roots. And the plant is feeding the bacteria. It gives them sugars and water. And in exchange, the bacteria is providing nitrogen, which the plant can use to grow lots of nice big biomass. And then after that plant dies and decomposes, that nitrogen stays in the soil and is ready and available for subsequent crops to use. So this is really great for farmers. It's an opportunity to grow nitrogen in place in the field instead of spending time and money hauling in your fertilizer from somewhere else in the form of compost, manure, or chemical fertilizers. The legumes can produce up to 400 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. And even at lower, more modest levels of about 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year, that can add up to some real savings in fertilizer costs. How much savings depends a little bit on the source of fertilizer. So we're estimating a kind of ballpark around $50 an acre for kind of regular chemical fertilizer. And that can be even greater savings for some of the more expensive kinds of organic fertilizers like the compost and the manure. So all this sounds really appealing. But we've learned in our trials that it doesn't always work out quite the way that you expect it to. When you're using chemical fertilizers, there's kind of formulas at play, and you apply a certain amount and you can expect a certain outcome. But this is biological nitrogen. And so these are living creatures that are working together out in the world, and things get a little fuzzier. So in our trials out in Lyford, we've had some legumes that actually fail to form nodules. We were really surprised when that happened and did a lot more digging into, well, what exactly is going on with this? So nitrogen fixation, to be successful, it requires both partners, both the plants and the bacteria, to be present and to be healthy. So there's two main ways that it can go wrong. The first is with the bacteria. Are the correct bacteria present? So each of those different legume species has a different rhizobia, a different bacteria partner that needs to be there in the soil for this partnership and nitrogen fixation to happen. Sometimes you get lucky and the right bacteria is present, just native in the soil. But if it's not, then that needs to be added at the time of seeding through inoculation. And that's just, you purchase the right species of rhizobia. You can usually get it from the same place that you get the seeds from. And at the time of seeding, you're mixing in that bacteria in with your seed and adding it to the soil. Then the other source of problems is on the plant end of things. Anything that causes the plant stress reduces the amount of sugar that it can send to those bacteria. And if the bacteria don't eat, they can't produce nitrogen either. So some of the sources of plant stress that can really cause problems are low moisture. That's been a really big issue for us, as Colin was talking about. We're working on the dryland farms, and moisture is always an obstacle. Additionally, nutrient deficiency or excess can be a source of problems, as well as environmental conditions like extreme temperatures, cold or hot, and pH that's not ideal for the legumes that you're growing. So over the several seasons that we've been trialing different cover crops, different legumes, we've come up with a few tips for being able to farm nodules effectively, thinking of yourself as a nodule farmer so that you're maximizing the amount of nitrogen you can get, maximizing the bang for your buck, the nitrogen benefits that you're getting from all the time and effort you're spending buying cover crop seeds, planting them, caring for them, and then terminating them. You want to make sure that you're getting all the benefits you can. So the first step is to choose locally adapted, seasonally appropriate legumes. So the first thing to think about is what time of the year are you thinking about cover cropping? Are you in the cool season, the warm season? And you want to match the legume species to those environmental conditions to just start off right, give it a good shot of growing well and being comfortable. Then within those two categories, the cool category and the warm category, each of those species also has slightly different requirements and tolerances in terms of pH, salinity, and nutrients. You can read about a lot of those online, but I think the easiest way to start to learn about which legumes are going to perform well on your property is just to start with small scale trials. Get a small amount of seed for a few different species, throw them in the ground and watch what happens. And it'll be so quick to be able to tell which of the ones are growing well, nice and green, nice big nodules, and which ones you might not want to try again at a larger scale. And then you can also talk to other folks locally who have tested out different cover crops and see what their experiences have been. So here in the Rio Grande Valley warm season, as Colin was mentioning, our real winners have been Cowpea and Sunn Hemp. Both of those we have in most places, we have their rhizobial partner native in the soil. So whether we inoculate them or not, almost anywhere we put them, they've been forming nice nodules and being really successful at nitrogen fixation, whereas some of the species that we don't have the native rhizobia for, those haven't been as successful. So step 2, you want to inoculate well with live bacteria of the correct type. So again, you're matching the bacteria to the legume that you want to grow. You'll be able to tell from the inoculant packaging. This one on the screen now, it says that it's for pea, vetch, and lentil. So if I wanted to be growing cowpea or Sunn Hemp or soybean, I would want to find a different inoculant, match that inoculant to the crop that I'm trying to grow. An important thing to remember is that the contents of this package, it looks like just a little black powder, and it's easy to forget that it's alive. But it is alive, and you have to keep it alive for it to work well. So that involves storing it at the proper temperature. It wants to be between 40 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So easy to just toss that bag up on the dashboard of the truck, and it'll really quickly get above 80, and then you'll start to lose live bacteria. It'll become less effective the longer it's out of its temperature range. So I always try to keep these in the fridge when I have inoculants around. And they all have expiration dates on them, and you want to check the expiration dates. If it's past the expiration date, you'll also start to lose live bacteria, and it'll become less effective. When you're inoculating, you want to try to do that as close to seeding time as possible, because the longer it's sitting on the seed without the seed growing, the bacteria also tend to decline in that state. And you want to try to maximize the amount of inoculant that's touching your seed. So you can see in the photo there, the inoculated seeds, they're visibly darker. They have lots of the black powder on them. You want to make sure that stays on as they're entering the soil. So step 3, we're going to keep our plants healthy. The bacteria are depending on the plant for water and nutrients. Healthier plants means higher potential nitrogen fixation. And some of those limitations can include temperature extremes, moisture, too much or too little, disease, light. Some of those things we can do something about, some of them we can't, but it's important to keep in mind that if your plants are struggling, you're probably not getting much nitrogen. And then we have chosen our legumes and gotten them into the ground, and I think they're doing pretty well. We want to actually take a shovel out in the field, and around 30 days after planting, the nodules should have appeared by then, and you want to dig up a few of them. Dig up the whole root structure, 5 to 10 plants from multiple areas of the field, and look and see what's going on in those roots. Different legume species have different shaped nodules and different sizes. We have Sunn Hemp here on the left that has kind of more conical nodules, and the Cowpea on the right, they're nice big round balls. But in general, more nodules and larger nodules means higher potential for nitrogen fixation. You also want to check out the inside of those nodules, and you want to see what color they are inside. You're looking for bright reds and pinks. That's a sign of nice active nodules. If you see tan ones, those are nodules that haven't become active yet for whatever reason. And if you see gray or green, that's a sign that it was active, but it isn't any longer. And that usually happens when the legume starts to flower. The plant decides to focus its sugars and its energy on the flower and seed production instead of feeding it to the bacteria. So the plant has changed its allocation of resources. So hopefully at that point, you just see lots of nice, healthy nodules, and you don't have to worry. You know that you're getting the nitrogen that you're expecting, but sometimes you don't. The nodules might be spotty or absent, and then it's time to troubleshoot and try to figure out what went wrong and if there's anything you can do to improve the nitrogen outcome in the future. We put together an online guide to help work through some of those steps, some of the most common problems and potential solutions for them. That's available at the UTRGV agroecology website at the URL on the screen. And also, you can definitely reach out to us with any questions. I love talking about legumes and nodules. It would absolutely make my day if anyone actually emailed me a question about nodules. So in conclusion, legume cover crops can be a cost-effective way to build nitrogen levels and soil health in place, but they require a lot of careful attention to the nodule formation in order to maximize the nitrogen benefits for your time and costs. So my email is there, and we have time for some questions.
We do, Stephanie. Thank you. Um, I do see a couple of questions in the Q&A box. The first one I would ask Stephanie, since you just got through speaking, maybe you address it first and then Colin, and we'll just kind of go back and forth that way. You alluded to it, but the question really is, what have been the major challenges that you've seen that have really come to your mind that farmers are not going to like this specific point? What's the major challenge?
Yeah. I think it requires a big shift in production systems. It's a whole extra step in the process where at a time of the year where you maybe don't have as much work on the farm, you're trying to get seeds ordered and get them in the ground and take care of them. So it's definitely a big learning curve, and it's something that has upfront costs, and then you don't know if it's going to have the financial payoff in the end. And then definitely something that the farmers that we work with have been really concerned about is that moisture loss issue. And that's something that we have been seeing out in the field in those first few years of for sure, that you have to be really careful about when you're planting the cover crops, when you're terminating, and just be very hopeful that you get enough rain before your next cash crop planting to make up for the moisture that the cover crops have used growing.
Thank you. Colin, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think all the points Stephanie made are really great. Yeah, I think a big issue is cost of equipment and cost of adding that practice. It takes skill and knowledge and time, but also material goods. Especially if you want to terminate something, you may have need a piece of equipment you don't already have on your farm, and also there could be costly mistakes where you make a mistake and now you have to get an extra, we've seen it in our project. We had to get an extra weeding crew out there to weed something because a cover crop regrew when we didn't want it to. We thought we had terminated it. So I think those on top of the water stealing aspects are some other ones to consider that are challenges for sure.
Oh, okay, thank you, Kyle. Let's kind of drill down on that water stealing aspect. Let's talk about a scenario that really is not an issue. A small scale 1 or 2 acre farmer probably is going to have irrigation, so this water stealing is not going to be an issue. So for someone who's on a really small scale, 1 or 2 acres kind of a thing, what kind of cover crops would you be really trying to steer them to? Colin, you want to try to address that first?
So, I would definitely recommend them for the, on the 1 or 2 acres scale. And, especially on 1 or 2 acres, you have more control. And you're likely irrigating if you're producing vegetables. This opens the door up quite a bit for you, and it will depend on your planting season, what your rotations look like. So you have the ability to grow some cool season and some warm season cover crops. And, like that daikon radish I mentioned, if you have a hard pan from someone who else owned the soil, you can use that daikon radish or that tillage radish to break up that hard pan. I think, Cowpea is always a winner. Sunn Hemp's always a winner. Pigeon pea is something that we've seen do fairly well. And, on a 1 to 2 acre plot, you could maybe intercrop or do some other things like that. And there's also some other options for termination, like I mentioned, burying it in compost, or you can start to play with some biosolarization where you mow down the cover crop and then cover it with a tarp and then let that kill off the cover crop. So I think there's a lot more flexibility there compared to our dryland farmers, and a lot more control.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I definitely agree about the flexibility. The 1 to 2 acre scale is the scale that we're managing cover crops on for our university research and educational farm. So that's kind of another scale that I think about cover crops at. And it does open up a lot of doors, both to have the irrigation afterwards to make up for any moisture usage. It allows for higher seeding rates because the seed cost is, much lower. And yeah, it's a lot easier to manage at the 1 to 2 acre scale than the 50 or 60 or 100 acre scale. The equipment is much cheaper as well.
Okay. The next question is even really, the way I see it, a little even more detailed question on the scale. Somebody asked a specific question about Roma tomatoes. What cover crops would you think would work well in the whole Roma tomato production? Stephanie?
For tomatoes, I'd probably be thinking about the nitrogen needs, and I might go for a legume to try to get some good nitrogen. And I maybe also about nematodes, so the daikon and the Sunn Hemp to kind of repel some nematodes could be a good choice too. And then I guess it also depends on the season. If you're doing a spring planting on the tomatoes, you're thinking about what's going to do well in the fall and winter before. So if you're doing fall, that would be some of the warm season options, maybe the Cowpea, Sunn Hemp, Sudan. And if you're heading into the more cooler time, maybe something like vetch.
Colin?
Yeah, the only thing scenario I could think of adding something would be if you're doing a high tunnel and you wanted to grow cover crops, and say you wanted to have tomatoes maybe for January. I've been to Yana and Sol's place down there, and they had tomatoes in January, early February. You would just maybe do your warm season cover crop in the fall. So you have that in the high tunnel, and they can terminate that and plant your tomato crop in the high tunnel.
Okay, thank you. Aisha, did you have a couple of questions you wanted to ask?
I do. The first one is, what's the return of investment on cover cropping?
I'm gonna let Colin go first.
Dollars.
So I don't have I actually have not been the person working on a lot of our economic analysis. The winners that we've chosen have been largely the ones that aren't incredibly expensive. Cowpea is more expensive, but you get to a lot of the grasses and things like that, and they're cheaper, but you don't get much nitrogen inputs. We have seen good weed suppression. So, when you think about eliminating sprays, you're trying to convert to organic, there is some, reductions there. And as far as, adding nitrogen, I believe that's not something we've been measuring as actual like nitrogen in the ground. We've been doing soil testing, but I can't answer to the actual dollar amount. Would you be able to, Stephanie?
Yeah, I also can't get it down to dollars, but I think we have gotten a strong sense that it's a long-term investment, the building of soil health gradually over time, and that the first season, especially when you think about maybe new equipment investment and the intense learning curve of figuring out how to implement cover crops in your system most effectively, probably not going to see returns the first year, maybe not even the first couple of years. And that's like really important in all of the government programs, the NRCS and those organizations, to help subsidize the upfront costs and make it more feasible for people to do it. Because I think the long-term soil health benefits are amazing, but we have to get people financially through that, the transitional period.
Yeah, and that would. Oh, sorry about that.
Well, just kind of going with what Stephanie mentioned about subsidizing, does NRCS support cover crops in Texas financially and like technical wise as well?
As far as I'm aware, they do through EQIP and through the Conservation Stewardship Program.
Awesome. Can cover crops help with issues of biodiversity, conservation, and or climate change? If so, how?
So,
okay, go ahead.
So as far as biodiversity, definitely, compared to just having a fallow to field, you have space for pollinators when you have Sunn Hemp, but also when we talk about soil biodiversity, you get a good cover. So especially down in the valley and in the rest of Texas, covering that soil up really reduces the heat stress and kind of a soil microbiology kill off that you would see. It makes the soil much more cool. It was conservation, diversity, and climate. The climate one is a little loaded as far as carbon sequestration, and we're talking carbon markets and climate change and things like that. That is one of the main things that people tout as a climate change mitigation strategy. It is a lot more complicated in drier areas like the Rio Grande Valley. it takes longer to sequester that carbon. One, because for soil health and improved soil health, you need lots of rain. Um, so it lowers the potential and also creates a longer timeline to sequester that carbon in more arid areas. So that's a tricky question, like terminating a cover crop or seeing the improvements in some place like, I have a buddy that has a farm in Portland and he grew his organic matter super fast versus here in the valley is going to be a lot different. So it can't be held to the same standards. Stephanie?
Yeah, I agree that the carbon sequestration issue is a really complicated one. But ideally, over time, if you're raising organic matter, then yes. About the biodiversity, just as someone who spent a lot of time on the ground in our cover crop fields, it's really incredible just the number of different insects, including beneficials, that hang out in there. We have lots of bees, including native bees that go to the Sunn Hemp flowers. And we've had good reports from some of our farmers who have, say, like aphid issues on their sorghum. And because we've given the beneficial insects a place to live over the winter, over the fallow season, they've had the beneficials come in and really help control their aphid issues in the sorghum crop, which has been pretty cool. So great for biodiversity, both above ground and below ground.
The last question I have is about weed suppression. How effective have cover crops been at suppressing weeds? Stephanie, please.
Yeah, so that depends a little bit on the cover crop. Just observationally, the cover crops do a really good job when they form like a nice thick canopy of preventing sunlight from getting to the soil and blocking those weeds from growing. There's a little bit of a trade-off in the dryland farming, especially because you want to be maximizing biomass for some of those reasons, suppressing weeds and building organic matter, but also the higher the biomass, the more moisture it's using. So we've been really trying to balance those two things. You get enough biomass to do some of those great things like weed suppression, but not so much that you're drying out the soil too much.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. We have a few minutes, and I would like to ask you a favor, Stephanie, if you might just give people a quick introduction of how what we've done over the last 3 years in the subtropical soil health is now going to help y'all lead into this next project that y'all got going on with the on-farm trials. I'm curious how those two are going to kind of piggyback off, that's going to piggyback off what we've done over the last 3 years.
Yeah. So in the 3 full years of the Subtropical Soil Health Initiative, we've gotten the chance to really test out so many different cover crops and get a much better sense of what some of the good options are for the valley and how they fit into the kind of dryland season. So we went into the 3 years really just with a lot of open questions of what's going to do the right job, when do you plant it, when do you terminate it? And we answered a lot of those. And so now we're heading into this new project where we can scale up, cover a lot more acreage, and we get more years of trials. And I think it'll really help us answer how long does it take for some of those benefits that we've seen at a small scale in the past 3 years for them to be enough for it to be worth farmers' time and money to do it on their own.
Okay, thank you. Colin, we did get one more question. I'm going to pose it to you because I know you had a little bit more experience with this, but we have a question about how do you incorporate the use of cover crops with taking care of animals like sheep and goats, for example? How might that go together?
Yeah, so some of these can be great forages. Cowpea, I think, is a great one. There are some issues with ones like Sunn Hemp and sorghum Sudan grass that actually can be toxic to animals depending on the timing. The seeds in Sunn Hemp can be toxic. And same thing with sorghum Sudan grass. When they're really young, they can be toxic to animals. So you have to watch that. As far as other cover crops like cereal, rye, black oats, and things like that, they're great options, But if you want a legume to add some protein to your forage values, yeah, cowpea is fantastic. And I'd be happy I was about to send in the chat my email, and Colin Kane beat us to it. Feel free to shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to have a longer conversation about that timing and figuring out those plantings and things like that.
Well, great. I appreciate it. Stephanie, you have one last comment you'd like to make before we kind of sign off here today?
No, I think I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you.